Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Kelly, and we are on Unit 2, Week 3, Day 2. And just to recap, we are reading excerpts from the novel As Brave as You by Jason Reynolds. So our learning goals for today is we are going to build stamina for independent reading. We're going to identify key events and use them to summarize a story. We're going to participate in a constructive conversation about the text and cite text evidence to support analysis and inferences in writing. I'm going to save independent reading until the end. I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, today we're going to talk about the appropriateness of a title. Did you ever hear the phrase, what's in a name? Well, that's what comes to mind when I see this lesson. So we're going to be talking about the titles of all of the excerpts that we have read from As Brave as You. So if you remember, the first excerpt we read was The Drive Down. Then we read Grandpop's Surprise. Then we read Sky Glitter. Then we read Ernie's Secret. Okay, so we read 4 excerpts from the book. Remember, it's not the whole book. It's just selected excerpts. And those titles are actually not in the book. The chapters just have numbers. They don't have titles. So we're going to talk about whether or not we think those are good titles for each of these excerpts. Okay, so in Unit 2, we have practiced identifying key ideas in a story and using them to summarize in our own words by applying the skill. And we summarized portions of The Drive Down and Sky Glitter. Remember, a summary is just the main ideas, like first, next, then last. That's it. Your summary shouldn't be more than 3 or 4 sentences. So today we're going to think about the excerpts that we've read from the novel As Brave as You, and we're going to kind of think about the appropriateness of the title of one of those excerpts. So if you have ever read any of these books, you may be familiar with them. So think about how a title is kind of a mini summary of a story. It kind of gives you a little tiny idea of what the book or story is about. So think about these books and whether or not the titles are appropriate for these stories. So Charlotte's Web, that is a book about a spider. And her name is Charlotte, and she spins a web and she writes messages in the web, right? Goodnight Moon. It's a story about saying goodnight to everything, right? You say goodnight to all the different things in the bedroom and then Goodnight Moon. Where the Wild Things Are. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but that's about a little boy who kind of imagines that he's on this island with monsters, right? He pretends to be a monster. You might be familiar with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, about a boy who wins a trip to a chocolate factory and gets to eat a lot of sweets. Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. And that's a book kind of about like following your dreams and doing, the things that you want to do. The Very Hungry Caterpillar, right? And the caterpillar eats through all of the different fruits and things on each day. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, right? He's kind of telling a story there. I've never read any of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, but maybe some of you who have read it, maybe you could tell me whether or not you think that was a good title. And The One and Only Ivan, I know a lot of you have read that book. So think about if you think that was a good title for that book. Does it kind of give a little bit of a summary of the story? And do you think it's an appropriate title? Or is there another title that might have been a little bit better? So remember, when you're summarizing, it's shorter than the actual text. You're using your own words and you're only giving the main ideas. So remember when we read The Drive Down? Okay, that was the first excerpt we read way back in week 1. And Ernie and Jeannie were in the car. Remember Ernie's cheeseburger coma? He was kind of sprawled out, sleeping, right? And Jeannie was kind of crammed up against the window because Ernie was taking up all the space. So do you think that this is an appropriate title for this excerpt? So in order to kind of figure that out, we would have to like skim over the story, maybe not reread the whole thing, but kind of skim it over. Think about the main idea and the details, right? The boys are taking a car trip down to visit their grandparents. They're going to be staying with their grandparents. The parents, remember, are not speaking, and they went like 4 hours without talking to each other, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And Jeannie's kind of like looking through his notebook on all his questions. So think about whether or not the title, The Drive Down, does that sum up, that summarize that particular excerpt from the book? So if I was going to give my opinion about this, I would first look for some evidence, right? Remember, if you can have an opinion, but you have to have some evidence or reasons to back it up. So right here in the text, in sort of like right here in the little title, below the title, this sort of little preview, it says that this is the story of two brothers from Brooklyn who go to stay with their grandparents in a rural area of Virginia for the summer. So that lets me know that they're going somewhere. That kind of fits with the drive down. Then it says that the boys had arrived after a long, cramped ride in the back of their dad's old Honda. Cramped at least for Jeannie because Ernie, in a cheeseburger coma, had stretched out in the back seat as if it was his own personal couch, forcing Jeannie to be smushed against the window for most of the trip. So that gives me a detail about the actual car trip itself. And remember, when we were talking about that, we said, oh yeah, a lot of us can relate to that because we've been on a long car ride that wasn't fun, or we've had our siblings kind of bothering us on a car ride. So those might be things that I would think about that would stand out to me as text evidence. So we know they're going to stay with their grandparents, so they're taking a trip. It's a long, cramped car ride. Ernie's hogging the back seat. So I would say that I think that this is an appropriate title because the entire excerpt is about the long drive down to their grandparents, and it helps us to learn about the main character's personality. So as this car ride is going on, we're learning about their personalities a little bit, right? Ernie wants to be cool. He's stretched out in the cheeseburger coma. Jeannie's kind of, thinking about bothering his brother, but then deciding against it. But then he's writing down his questions and flipping through his questions. So I would say, yes, I think that is an appropriate title for this excerpt. Now, what you're going to do is you are going to do the same thing with Grandpop's Surprise. Do you think that this is an appropriate title for this excerpt from the story? Okay, so when we're finished, you will have a Google Doc to type in, and I will show you that. And I will post Grandpop's Surprise as a material just in case you don't have your booklet at home. So skim the text, right? Look for text evidence. Decide whether or not you think this is a good title for this particular excerpt from As Brave as You, or chapter from As Brave as You, and why or why not, right? What evidence in the text, what reasons do you think it is or is not a good title? So remember the main idea and details. Think, does it sum up the story? If the title sums up the story or tells like the most important part, then it's probably a good title. So you are going to do this on the Google Doc, and it looks like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to skim over the excerpt from Grandpop's Surprise, recall the main idea and details, think to yourself, is this a good title for this excerpt? Does the title sum up the story? And remember, if the title sums up the story or tells about the most important part, then it's probably a good title. And don't forget to support your opinion with at least 2 examples of evidence from the text. And there's some possible sentence starters there for your opinion sentence. I think Grandpop's Surprise is the perfect title because I do not think Grandpa's Surprise is a good title because, and you might come up with other sentence starters too. Those are just some to give you an idea. So on the left-hand side is going to be your evidence, and on the right-hand side is your opinion sentence. So you might write your opinion sentence first and say, yes, I think that this is a good title for the perfect title for this excerpt because, and then give your evidence and answer it, right? And then over here, go back into the text and give examples or maybe a quotation or something from the text that backs up your opinion. So you'll do that in just a minute. Now, I have a read aloud here, and this story is actually, it goes along with our Black History Month stories, and we're going to listen to this story and see if we can kind of summarize it, okay? Remember, summarizing is only the main parts. This is called Game Changers, and it is the story of Venus and Serena Williams. If you're familiar with Venus and Serena Williams, they are sisters and they are tennis players. Very famous and very, very good tennis players.
Hi, I'm Lisa Williamson, and I'll be reading Game Changers, the story of Venus and Serena Williams, illustrated by James Ransom, and written by me. Venus and Serena Williams, V and Mika, two peas in a pod, best friends. Everybody who saw them knew they were as close as two sisters could be. They grew up in the shadows of each other. First, Venus was born in June of 1980. Little sister Serena came right behind her in September of 1981. Whatever Venus did, Serena followed. So when their father took Venus to the tennis court to begin lessons, Serena begged to go along. 6 days a week they rose before the sun. Sleepy-eyed, the girls rolled out of the bed they shared, climbed into their dad's run-down VW bus, and squeezed between their 3 older sisters, rackets, and a shopping cart filled with tennis balls and brooms. Between the early morning dark and the first light of the day, the girls stretched and warmed up, then swept the courts clean of broken glass and trash before their first practice of the day began. Neighborhood folks laughed at a father, Richard, with tennis ambitions and a Compton address, but Richard's dreams soared far beyond the rough and tumble streets outside of Los Angeles County, California. From the beginning, tennis was a family affair. First with their 3 older sisters, Yatande, Lindria, and Isha. When they lost interest, the younger girls stepped in. Richard practiced with Venus on one court, while Oracene, their mother, hit with Serena on the other to the cheers of their sisters on the sidelines. It wasn't long before their father's dreams became their own. Venus and Serena didn't have time for friends or sleepovers or trips to the mall. Tennis filled their days. Side by side, they whispered into the night, "Do you really think I can do it?" they'd ask each other. "Do you really think I have a chance?" Sound asleep, tennis filled their dreams. They threw footballs to improve their serves, tossed rackets into the air to build strength, and chased second-hand tennis balls so flat they learned to run faster to hit their low bounce. Not having expensive training equipment and professional coaches meant they had to make up their own drills. Off the courts, they worked to improve their speed with track and their flexibility with ballet. When gunshots rang out in the distance, Richard reminded them, "Never mind the noise, just play." But when shots from the neighborhood's rival gangs whizzed near the courts, the girls quickly learned to drop their rackets and lie still until the shooting stopped. The public courts of East Compton Park, with grass poking through the cracks in the cement and chain-link nets, looked nothing like the courts they saw on television where their favorites, John McEnroe, Monica Seles, and Pete Sampras played. By the time Venus was 4, she could hit 500 tennis balls at every practice. By the time she was 7, she began playing in junior tournaments. Playing on Compton's public courts kept the girls hidden from much of the tennis circuit. But when Venus won every single one of her 63 junior tournaments by age 10, with Serena not far behind, word of the Williams sisters spread. "Whatever you become in your head first," their mother preached daily. With her talent grew confidence. At 12, Venus announced she would win Wimbledon. In 1994, at 14 years old, Venus played her first professional match at the Bank of the West Classic in California. Tennis critics took note after the young newcomer's combination shots and her return of serve helped her soar past higher-ranking players to advance to the second round. Overnight, Venus went from an unclassified ranking to number 313 in the world. Your time will come, Venus comforted Serena, sad not to be sharing the spotlight with her sister. When the press surrounded Richard asking if Venus would be the next #1 player, Richard smiled. Have you seen my other daughter Serena play? 1 year later, it was Serena's turn. Within 3 short years, both girls ranked in the top 50. Long-legged, brown-skinned, beaded, cornrowed sisters stood out in a sea of white tennis attire, white fans, and white opponents. They dressed as they pleased in their own designs. During matches, they hit so hard, sometimes the rubber bands in their hair broke, scattering beads across the court. Tennis had never seen anything quite like them. Many tennis fans cheered the energy and powerful playing of two fresh faces in tennis. But sometimes the sisters were threatened, booed, and taunted by others not happy to see them competing in a nearly all-white sport. They'd heard those words years earlier when their father brought in busloads of neighborhood kids to surround the practice courts as they played. Do your best, he told the kids, and paid each and every one to hurl the worst words his daughters might hear during their matches. Now, whenever those same words tumbled from the stands, they fell as flat as second-hand tennis balls. Words and gunshots, hatred and doubt couldn't slow the rise of the two sisters who called themselves the greatest story in tennis. They loved the same bands, laughed at the same jokes, wore the same clothes. Only on the court were they different. There, Serena was as strong as Venus was fast. Venus was as gracious as Serena was aggressive. Venus's long legs could carry her cross-court in a couple of strides. At 130 miles per hour, her serve broke a world record. Serena chased down every ball, drilling them back to her opponents with high-powered ground strokes. I hate losing more than I love winning, Serena told reporters. Life on the professional circuit meant traveling to tournaments and trekking as a family across the world to the Australian Open, French Open, Wimbledon in England, and New York City's U.S. Open to compete in one Grand Slam event after the next. Not wanting to be separated during tournaments, the sisters shared hotel rooms, but the crowds loved it when they shared a court. Sister Act, Smash Sisters, Sister Slam headline screamed. Tickets were hard to come by on the days Venus and Serena were scheduled to play each other. In doubles, knowing each other as well as they did paid off with win after win. But on opposite sides of the court, they were competitors first, sisters second. At the Australian Open in 1998, Venus and Serena cheered each other as they both advanced. But each win also brought them closer to playing against each other. When they both advanced to the third round, they stood on opposite sides of the court for the very first time. Venus was focused, but Serena, at 16 years old, in her first major tournament, was shaky. The match started slowly, each cautiously watching the game unfold against the opponent who knew her best. In their first set, Venus edged ahead after a tiebreak. Serena looked to the players' box where her family sat, quiet for the first time. In the next set, Venus took control. Heads turned from left to right, right to left for a Venus victory, 7-6 and 6-1. Serena was as sad for her loss as she was happy for Venus's win. But then Venus kept winning, match after match, year after year, in each of their matchups. She knows how to beat me and knows my weakness is better than anyone, Serena said of her big sister. In 2000, they traveled to Sydney, Australia for the Olympics and returned home wearing the gold medals they earned together for the United States in doubles. In 2002, they faced each other again in the finals of the French Open. With each round she advanced, Serena pushed aside thoughts of their earlier matches and of Venus's successes. While their family again sat quietly in the stands, Venus served big for the first set and took the lead. But Serena broke serve and won. The second set was hard fought, and the sisters rallied with down-the-line combinations, skidding from sideline to baseline until the final match point when Venus cracked the ball into the net, and the moment belonged to Serena. In two sets of 7-5 and 6-3, a victorious Serena stepped out of the shadow of her sister. Venus ran off the court as the curious eyes of the crowd followed her. High into the stands, Venus sprinted, snatched up her bag, and pulled out a camera. "Nothing can keep me from celebrating when my best friend wins a match," Venus said proudly. The crowd stood to applaud, and Venus snapped shot after shot of Serena on the victory stand. Ranked numbers 1 and 2 in the world, Venus now followed Serena. Mika and V, two peas in a pod, best friends and sisters, celebrated being numbers 1 and 2 in life and in tennis. The end.
And I love that the author of the book is the one that read it. Oops. Okay, so let's think back to all the way back in week 1. That was week 2 when we read Grandpa's Surprise and we practiced making connections. And we thought about how the story related to other stories we've read. Remember, we did the text to text, text to self, text to world, right? Prior knowledge. And yesterday, you made connections after reading Ernie's Secret. So here were some of the examples of the connections that we made, or the types of connections that we made as we were reading Ernie's Secret. So as you are listening to the read aloud of Game Changers, did you make any connections? Right? They're siblings. They're kind of like competitive, but they also root for each other. Maybe you have a sibling that you're like that with. They had to work really, really hard to get where they were. It seems like, they had a lot of obstacles to overcome, and they did that. They were able to achieve they were the highest and still maybe the highest ranked tennis players in the world. At least Serena, I think, is one of the highest ranked tennis players in the world. Did it remind you of any other books, or maybe a movie or a TV show, or something that you already know? Maybe you know something about tennis, or maybe you've played tennis before. I think their story is a wonderful story because they're sisters and they can be competitive, but then when they're not on the tennis court, they're best friends again. So that competitiveness of tennis, that doesn't carry over into their non-tennis life, right? And the fact that they started out, nobody really knew who they were. They were kind of playing on a really small court in a not so great neighborhood, and they worked their way up to where their matches were selling out when they were ranked the best in the world. So that is it for today. You are going to go into that Google Doc, and you're going to write whether or not you think, let me go back here and show you the Google Doc, if this will let me go back. Oh, there it is. You're going to look at the Google Doc and decide whether or not you think that Grandpa's Surprise is an appropriate title for that excerpt. You're going to write your opinion sentence and then give 2 examples of evidence from the text. So if you do think that it is a good title, give two maybe lines or quotations from the text. If you don't think that it is a good title, then give 2 examples of why you do not. And think about, if you could rename that excerpt, what would you call it besides Grandpa's Surprise? So you might want to even include that in your opinion sentence. If you didn't think it was a good sentence, you could even say, I think a better title would be, and then say what you think your better title would be. Okay, guys, if you have any time that is left over after you do your assignment, you can do your independent reading. Remember, find a nice spot. Read, set a timer if you have your phone, or a YouTube timer, or maybe just like your microwave or a little one of those dial timers for about 15 minutes if you have it. If you'd like to read longer and you have more time, be my guest, and just get comfortable and just kind of lose yourself in your book. And as you're reading, remember to make those connections. Think about what you're reading, think about the text, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. All right, guys, I will see you later. Bye.